it works. So hello, everyone. We're just waiting for Christian. Okay, here we are. Oh, that's okay. So this is, well, Velux Foundation and IUCN and Filantropia Ambiental, we have all gone together and organized this event, which is focusing on the philanthropical organization's contribution to the implementation or achievement of the SDGs. And in that regard, we all work on nature projects. We all have a focus on ocean and climate and the ocean climate nexus. And we as a foundation supports the different UN processes, the implementation of the new global target, and also the resolutions adopted on the UNEA, and also the ocean climate dialogue within the UNFCCC. And this is why that we are so excited that we were able to get the panel that we have now, the speakers that we have now, because they all represent the UN processes that we as organizations, as philanthropical organization fund and think is really important. So I quickly want to introduce the people that we have here with us. And we have Francesca Cordes-Solares, which is the executive president of the foundation. She's also the funder. And we have my colleague here, Patricia Morales, which is a director, and for the same foundation. Then we have Abdella Moxit from IPCC, secretary of IPCC. And then we have a fellow Dane, Inger Andersen, that is the general secretary for the UN Environmental Program. We're super excited that she took the time to be here. And we have, of course, the UN Ocean Envoy, Peter Thompson, and acting executive secretary for the CBD Secretariat, David Cooper, and then, not least, Christian Samper from the Bezos Earth Foundation. Yeah. And we really want this to be an interactive dialogue, so the presentation that is giving and the panel discussion afterwards, we really want to engage with all of you to engage with them, and we have to underline that the focus is the philanthropical challenges and the way that we as a philanthropical organization can support the SDGs and the UN processes. And then, of course, not to forget, we have IUCN, and we are still waiting to see if the president of IUCN can make it, but as you all know, if you came today, there's a little bit of a traffic issue going on outside, so we are still hoping, yeah. And with these words, I would like to give over to Inger.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here and welcome all of you to our house, your house, the United Nations, and to UNGA Week, and to this special and unique days that we have for the SDGs. And for me, it's a particular pleasure to be here with an event that is co-hosted by my old friends and old organization from IUCN. It's a pleasure to see you all here, and of course to be together with my dear friends from the UN side as well. And I think when we speak about the foundations, and I really want to congratulate Velux as well as Cordes-Solares for being here and for really pushing on these issues. I think it's absolutely clear that there is an understanding by your foundations, but by others too, that we're falling behind on the SDGs. And when we now know that we have the Paris Agreement, and remember it was agreed in 2015, we're already 8 years in here, and we have these other targets that were agreed in Montreal last year in December that are very, very ambitious, and I encourage you all to read them, and don't focus just on one, 30 by 30. Focus on the whole package, and that whole package is what you need to hold. And that means halving pollution into the environment. That means halving nutrient runoff into the environment. And then we are talking fertilizers, so let's have a conversation about that. That means doubling or multiplying by many the support that we are providing to nature. It means ending invasive species. And it means, of course, yes, restoring 30% more by 2030, have that under active restoration by 2030, as well as protecting 30% on land and on sea, and much more. The rights of indigenous people, involvement of young people, and so on and so forth. Understand that whole thing, and then take that into the oceans, which is one of the things that we're focusing on today. And it's a pleasure to sit here with the Oceans Envoy, you do such a great, great job. But for philanthropy then, where do you come in, where do you dock, and how do you dock? I think that's a really healthy conversation. Because we understand that, and here I will push a little bit back because I have a hard time taking the oceans out and just talking on oceans because it's one planet. And sort of from mountain to sea, it's all interconnected. And we need to understand that as well. But of course, the oceans matter and matter greatly. If we talk about this, how do we build healthy oceans? Well, we have to think about oceans being this innocence, right? The oceans cannot help but take up CO2. They will. It's not like a choice. On the terrestrial side, taking up CO2 is usually a really good thing because that means that we have trees and ecosystems. But in the oceans, unless it's kelp forests and mangroves and stuff, the water will just take it. And what we're doing here is essentially making that innocent, just taking it up, causing, therefore, acidification, causing, therefore, with the heat, ocean warming. And that is something that the oceans can't but do. And so do not think of the oceans as the solution for carbon storage. It is a bad thing unless it goes into a biota that grows in the ocean, right? Anything else, not good. So we need to be careful around that. And so how is it then that we will make these things happen? And what kind of role can philanthropy play here? I think we from UNEP, we speak about 3 priorities. And the first priority is unequivocally is to implement and stand behind the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework. And I encourage again, please read it from A to Z and understand that as part of that framework. I think David might have just read it. But understand that there are also things that are not in the framework and in other documents, for example, digital sequencing information. Because how is it that the genetic makeup of species that today are taken for granted by pharmaceutical, how can we crack that nut and make resources flow from big pharma into biodiversity? It is, in a sense, the same conversation we had when we began the conversation about UNFCCC back in 1992. How do you get carbon yields to go to those that need them the most? That's the conversation we are having about digital sequencing information. Very complicated, not easy, but please do engage as the private sector. So Kunming, Montreal, Biodiversity Framework, absolutely critical. And of course, pour money into that, but only if at the same time you're engaging with someone that are helping shift the policy levers. Policies on subsidies, policies on unsustainable practices, policies that have to be then also implemented. These are the kind of policies that we should encourage and enhance in all countries, including in the global south. And that becomes important. Otherwise, the money will not go with the impact that we need. So that's point 1. Point 2, and I have to say this because I am in the middle of another negotiation, plastic. That's the thing. Okay, plastic in the environment. Yes, it is in your bodies. Every person on this planet has plastic in your bodies, plastic in the placenta of mothers, plastic in newborn babies, and that is a problem. So we need to deal with this marvelous material that we see everywhere, but which we have been abusing. So in the negotiations around plastic, because in the CBD, Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, we are very much talking about eliminating plastics from the environment. And of course, in the oceans, it is a very, very big problem. Not just for sea life, not just for plants, etc., but also obviously for the communities that live off of this. And so that's very important. We are engaged in this negotiation. The third round of negotiations will happen in November in Nairobi, round 4 in Canada in the spring, round 5, and the final one, we hope, will be in Korea in the fall of 2024. And here we need to have elimination of the unnecessary stuff, what India calls mindless plastic. The plastic that we just use for a minute, throw away, and we didn't really need it. We need to rethink the products. Do they need to be contained in plastic, at all? Or can they be dry and not wet? Soap, there's some cosmetics, etc. And can we rethink it all together? And of course, when we do need it, can we recycle it? That's important because it contains harmful chemicals which leach into groundwater and into nature and are taken up by animals and species ourselves alike. The zero draft of the new treaty text was out 2 weeks ago. Please have a look at it and please engage around that, because this 2 words that the world has put together, which is absurd and nearly obscene, ocean plastic. There is no such thing. There's ocean beauty, there's ocean storms, but there is no ocean plastic. There is not such a thing. It's dirt and pollution and our toxic waste that we have caused effluent into the oceans. But that scourge, including, of course, cut fishing gear, has to be tackled. And my third point is, when we are talking about the oceans, we need to talk seriously about climate change. I spoke to that in the beginning, but now I want to speak to it in terms of adaptation, because, and I'm speaking in front of a set of colleagues and partners that know this very well, but when we lean on nature to make nature help us be more resilient, we are also restoring nature. And this whole story around nature-based solutions is absolutely critical. And when we invest in nature, we are investing in resilience. And so whether it is the coral reefs that break the storms, whether it is the mangroves that absorb the pressure of the high winds, whether it is the coastal forests that do likewise, or whether it is the wetlands that take some of the hits that would otherwise have gone into human habitation, investing in those spaces and places means also investing in species and opportunities for nature to regenerate. Now, we know that there is a shortfall of money in this space. 300 billion is what we need by 2030, and the funding gap is absolutely massive. And no, it will not come from the public purse alone. That is clear. But the leverage that public money or philanthropic money can do on the private sector money is critical. And we need to increase that vastly. Today, as we know, most of the money that goes into biodiversity funding is in fact from public sources. That's a fine thing, but the global taxpayer cannot pick up the total bill. It's simply not possible. And that means that we need to change, because private sector, your pension fund, is not going to go and do something that will not yield a return, because you'd like to have your pension when you're 80. And so, what then does the return look like, and how can we ensure that that return is there, that provides the surety for the investors that there is in fact a return on the investment? And that's a conversation that we have, which means thinking about and rethinking around the financial frameworks and rethinking around what we value and the legislative spaces that we put in place. I think I really want to commend what Velux is doing on the Velux Foundation's Ocean Institute. We think that this is very, very exciting. And I also want to mention the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which is co-chaired by UNEP and the UK, which is an important fund. I want to mention Tompkins Conservation, which is co-funded by Northern Patagonia. These kind of initiatives, just to mention a few, and there may very well be many, many others in the House, are really important because they're putting money to work in important places. We at UNEP and in the UN writ large, and you have a whole lineup here of UN folks, we're very, very keen to enable that the UN can be a place where you can find what levers you might, don't necessarily give us the money, but give the money to levers that will make some shifts. And of course, I think work with peer networks, again, within the biodiversity community, there are very important peer networks that can guide and provide insights to philanthropy, where it's not just what I sometimes say, boutique projects that are cute and nice inside the project boundaries, but outside it's an unholy mess. And that doesn't work, because the moment the project is over, everything becomes, and often it falls apart and becomes an unholy mess. So how do we anchor it so that we will have long-term sustainability? I think that the philanthropic money is so precious and so important and so unique. So how do we put this philanthropic money so that it gets the greatest return, to the closest to the communities, but also the closest to long-term sustainability? And there, the challenge sometimes for philanthropic money is that it has not worked with the state, because it's at the state level where policies shift. And how do you, on the one hand, put them on the front line to communities, on the other hand, make sure that where you need to see policy shifts, because it's often the policies that are undermining nature, that you also work with the state. And that's where partnering with United Nations or others is a helpful thing. We can do all of this. I just spoke in another panel. This is not a pipe dream. I mean, we're seeing shifts. It's just going way too slowly. And we need to just amp it up, but amp it up on all the good energy sources, the human ingenuity, the commitment, and the absolute determination that we see amongst everyone here. It's not a dream. It's just a plan, and now we need to execute that plan. And I have every faith that we can do it. I'll stop here. Thank you.
I think this was very valuable for all of us to that you highlighted three things. You highlighted that we should really focus on all the global target, and not only global target 3 on 30% protected areas, but we should look at all of them because they're all interlinked. And also the fact that we also have the upcoming plastic treaty, which hopefully gets adopted next year, and we all have to cross our paws that will happen. And then and I think we all agree that there needs to be much more money for that to be implemented, because this is the first treaty that is looking into a circular economy approach, and that will be groundbreaking when that happens. And also, you know, the ocean, the climate, and how we as a philanthropic organization can support that, and of course support research or whatever that focuses on policy change. And I think that is definitely what the VLUX Foundation does. This is our aim, is that the research that we support actually can make a change. That is what we're here for. So I want to thank Ange so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. And if you have any questions, I would like you to wait till the end, so we can just quickly have the other speakers, and then you can come up with your questions, which is, of course, have to be focused on philanthropical work. And then we'll take the questions within the panel. So right there behind your ears, and we'll get back to you. And then I would like to give the word to Abdullah Muqsid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am really delighted and honored to address this opinion. But the organizer did something which is strong. They put me near my boss. So you can understand I am shaking. So, but also, I am also honored, also, and thank you to VLUX and Cortes Solari and also all the colleagues to invite IPCC to contribute to this event, which is excellent one. But let me start already also to inform you that UNEP, United Environment Program, and as well as the World Meteorological Organization are the parent of IPCC. IPCC was established by this parent organization. And I want also to take the opportunity here to thank very much my boss, because we did have our election plenary in Nairobi. It was the most difficult election plenary in the history of IPCC. Just to give you an idea, all the time election, all the region, 5 regions from 6 regions in the world are coming with consensus. This time, no region come with consensus for, selecting their candidates. Why? Everybody wants to be in IPCC. And this is something. But I think with your leadership, the leadership of your team, we made it. And we conclude the cycle in good form. And any country, we have new bureau, and everybody is happy. I would like also to thank the foundation, Velux, Cortes Solari, for the excellent work they are doing, and for associating IPCC for all the work. And as you know, this session is about SDGs and the role of philanthropy, and I was expecting really that all the colleagues will speak about ocean and other aspects. Now I will structure my presentation in 3 aspects. The first one is related what is coming from the last report of IPCC, which our scientists report. That will give you a stock take about what is the climate change. Second axis is about what is sustainable development in connection with the conclusion for IPCC. The third thing is the role of philanthropy to help IPCC in his work. So, concerning the first point, which is the 6th assessment cycle and scientists report. In 2018, the IPCC highlighted the challenge of keeping warming to 1.5 degrees C. 5 years later, still the challenge is greater. The IPCC scientists report highlight that we already reached 1.1 degrees Celsius. And it is clear that 1 century of using fossil fuels and also not using energy in a good way and losing the opportunity to some good practice is putting us in a very dangerous track. So despite some progress to reduce climate risk, we are ill prepared for the hazard and extraordinary threat we face today and into the future. Let me just share with you the situation in Libya with this cyclone. Almost 10,000 deaths. And this is a sign. So I am forgetting the earthquake in Morocco, but it is not climate change. But this shows also how vulnerable our countries. So this shows that any country in any region in the world, they can be really in difficult situation in regard of extreme events. And also, the 1.5 degrees C as anomaly, as target, need serious mobilization to tackle it. So deep, rapid, and sustained emission reduction and accelerated adoption action are required during this decade to address climate change. Effective and equitable climate action now can lead to the more sustainable, resilient, and just world. More ambitious and more determined climate action will provide wider benefit for nature and people. But it is not just word. This is what I am reading, a sentence coming from summary for policymakers, which was approved by the government. Why we are saying this? There are some options, demonstrated options, that shows that if you are taking the good ambition, the good action, we can make it. So there are tried and tested policies and practices that can work in diverse contexts to reduce emission and advance climate resilience. We also have the technologies and know-how. But all these need to be scaled up and applied more widely. Now I will share with you the aspect related global sustainable development goal. And in the sixth cycle, in summary for policymakers, we came with a concept which is linked to sustainable development goal. It is climate resilient development. What it means? That means we can tackle climate change by taking into consideration some adaptation action as well as mitigation, in order to improve the quality of life, to improve the well-being, but in the same time you are reducing emission. And this is what this concept is, climate resilient development. By improving, you are using renewable, by reducing emission. What we are doing, we are also improving quality of life. We can take a big city, reducing all these greenhouse gases. We are improving the quality of air, and we are also improving the condition of health. And we are making the city more green, more well to live. And I think there are many countries already experiencing something that can mix between mitigation and improving life. This is the concept coming in summary for policymaker, climate resilient development. So that means that sustainable development is working hand in hand with any action that's putting adaptation and mitigation as a tandem. And this is something that can really also motivate more countries to tackle climate change by using, taking the appropriate and interesting way that can save lives and goods and improve current as well as future generation. Now, I think this is a summary for policymaker, and also this is the last, what was approved by government. And there is a paragraph coming, which was approved line by line. And it is approved by government. And it is exactly what it says, that climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health, between brackets, very high confidence. There is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all, between brackets, very high confidence. Climate resilient development integrates adaptation and mitigation to advance sustainable development for all and is enabled by increased international cooperation, including improved access to adequate financial resources, particularly for vulnerable regions, sectors and groups, and inclusive governance and coordinated policies, between brackets, high confidence. The choices and action international in this decade will have impact now and for thousands of years, high confidence, and for that means I am reading this word by word because it was approved line by line, and it was, it was even approved during the night. We were not sleeping. So this is kind of paragraph that can rely climate resilient development to sustainable development goal, and this is a clear, appeal to all the partners. Not only this, also any action matters, and Filantropía can also do their work. This brings me to the third point, which is the role of philanthropy. So as it was already highlighted, sometimes each actor in the process have tied hand. Some of them have tied hand. But there are some actors with some open possibilities to fill the gap, but to bring some activities that can complement what is also undertaken by government, by other actors. And in this case, let me highlight that it was already highlighted that as a matter of help, for IPCC, we have three aspects. First one about we are assessing science. And here, I think the appeal to the philanthropy is to help assessing. The second aspect is about how we communicate information, how we make the voice of climate science easy for any stakeholder. Here also, philanthropy can play a role. The third thing is how we can make it inclusive, how we can open the door to newcomers, to youth, to other kind of population, indigenous people, gender, regional representation. And in this context, also, philanthropy have the possibility, they have the flexibility to play excellent role. I can have two examples, two really modest. I am honored to be frank with you to work with Cortes Solari. We are going to have our 5th pavilion in COP. Before, in other cycle, we didn't have, IPC did have one booth, 4 square meters. But with the idea to have a pavilion, we call it science pavilion, but with them, we are really coming with excellent pavilions. I am calling it sort of toolbox for any negotiator that come in, taking their information, and we are planning it. Even the events, any side event, is planned one day before the agenda of the COP. That allow any delegate to go there to take something to take away, and they are going. This is, and also they are helping us for any outreach. All those outreach difficult. The last thing also is about new scientists. And this, with their collaboration and the foundation of Alberto of Monaco, as well as Como Foundation, we start by providing scholarship for 10 clients in the beginning of cycle 2016. Now we are into 40 PhD doctoral people having their PhD in the context, in the field of climate change. So, look, it is about helping new scientists, second, outreach, and also even helping in assessing. So I think this is a kind of activity that we can, encourage, amplify, and this is for well-being. So I want just to conclude, because I am looking to my boss. and I want to conclude that after the election plenary in Nairobi, we have now a new chair, a new bureau, as I said. And this cycle, we have the new chair, Jimsky from UK, and we started already that IPCC 7th cycle will be closer to the expectation, to stakeholder, to any population, in order to go in the world to more assessment and more specific information. This information that can bring added value for all individuals. So the 7th cycle will be more solution-oriented, and also more implementation possibility. I should stop here, and I think I was really honored to be here. Thank you very much.
I'm very sorry that I need to leave, but the amazing Sylvia Earle has just stepped into the room. Her deepness, explorer-in-chief, the most amazing woman of the oceans. Can we give her a round of applause?
And Inga unfortunately has to leave us. She's a very busy woman, so that is fine. And we just want to appreciate that Sylvia made the effort to come and join our session. And Sylvia, if you want to, there is a seat for you here. Yeah. Do you want to go up? Yeah. And then I just want to say thank you to Abdallah, because he really highlighted the need for science and the need for the philanthropical organization to support the science and how we can communicate science to all stakeholders, including government, to make a policy change. And then, of course, highlighting the importance of Corte Solari and the support for the pavilion, IPCC pavilion at COP. And, of course, we will all be at COP28 and continue the success. So with these words, I want to give the word to Peter. And he will sort of finalize the statements that we have this afternoon before we go into the panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. Apologize for my voice. I picked up a cold flying here. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for arranging this gathering and looking around the room. It's quite a gathering. I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes just setting out what ocean-related action the world is taking to address the triple crises of global warming and biodiversity loss and pollution. And then I'll spend the following 5 minutes talking about what I see as philanthropy's place in the strengthening of that action. So UN diplomats are rightly criticized for our overuse of acronyms. But please allow me one that will recur throughout my remarks today, which is SDG 14. The 14th Sustainable Development Goal sets out to conserve and sustainably use the ocean's resources. And I'll be taking it for granted, again, looking around this room, that you all have a good idea of SDG 14's targets, covering such topics as marine pollution and ocean acidification and protection of marine ecosystems and ending of overfishing and harmful fisheries subsidies. Anybody who's paying attention must be aware that we exist at a pivotal time for our species. The triple crises are an existential fact. Evidence for that abounds. The atmosphere and ocean are heating at alarming rates. Planetary boundaries are being crossed. Biodiversity, think life, is atrophying. And you've all heard the calculation that following our current path, there'll be more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. As Secretary General Guterres has said, we've been at war with nature itself, and the time has come for us to make peace. So my daily mantra is there can be no healthy planet without a healthy ocean, and the ocean's health is currently measurably in decline. That said, I've come to believe that we will effectively overcome two of the main causes of that decline, namely marine pollution, particularly plastic pollution, and harmful human activities related to the fishing industry. We should, by the time of SDG 14's maturation in 2030, have the frameworks in place to control, if not completely eliminate, those two travesties against nature. But correcting the course of ocean acidification, ocean deoxygenation, and ocean warming is a more pernicious battle due to the long-term effects of what we've been putting into the planet's atmosphere. Make no mistake, there is one central cure for the damage being done to the ocean's health, and that is rapid reduction of anthropogenic greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. In short, we must stop burning fossil fuels. So while we grapple with powerful forces to make up the shortfalls in our implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement and the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we can take great heart from the fact that there has been of late a wave of international consensus in support of correcting the course of our relationship with nature. Starting in Nairobi in February last year with the UN Environment Assembly's decision to begin negotiations for an internationally binding treaty to control plastic pollution. We've been witnessing a remarkable run of hard-won multilateral agreements, all of which have positive impacts on SDG 14's prospects for realization. Happily, the International Negotiating Committee, established to realize the Plastic Pollution Treaty, is now working on a text that will come under the spotlight in Nairobi this November. And as you heard from Minga, the hopes are high that we'll have it concluded by the end of next year. In Montreal last December, credit to David on my right, the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, that's basically all of us, after a drawn-out process that crossed continents to overcome COVID's challenges, came to a remarkable international consensus and adopted the Global Biodiversity Framework. This was a massive step towards forward for SDG 14, especially through its agreement to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. And then along with its other welcome provisions in favor of good governance of the high seas, the recently adopted BBNJ Treaty, let's call it the High Seas Treaty, also gave a major boost to the framework's 30% target through its introduction of area-based management tools that point towards the establishment of large marine protected areas in the high seas. Meanwhile, SDG 14 still labors under the 34% overfishing statistic reported by the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, for assessed global fish stocks. 1 in 5 fish are estimated to be caught illegally. But with every new signature of FAO's Port States Measures Agreement, we come one step closer to eliminating illegal fishing. And at the same time, work on the elimination of harmful fisheries subsidies, which is no small thing. You know, we're talking about $20 to $30 billion worth of subsidies, mainly to industrial fishing fleets every year. It continues to make steady advances at the World Trade Organization, the WTO. With ratifications of last year's WTO decision on illegal fishing gathering momentum, and that's quite significant momentum now, and negotiations on subsidies leading to overcapacity, moving in the direction of the adoption at the WTO Ministerial in February next year. Following on from the massive support received for SDG 14 from the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon last year, we're now building towards the 3rd UN Ocean Conference to be held in Nice in early June 2025. These conferences were brought into existence to support the implementation of SDG 14, filling an otherwise empty space. So all in all, I tip my hat to the international community for what it's done over the last 2 years to get the frameworks in place for us to make peace with nature. When it comes to implementation, scale must not daunt us, for failure is just not an option. The healthy planet mantra is undeniable, and the demand of intergenerational justice is that we dedicate ourselves to reversing the decline. The call to action to those countries that have yet to ratify these agreements is please do so without further delay. Only then can our agreements come into force, enabling us all to then get on the critical business of implementation. To any of you with influence on government in your own countries, the cat's cry must be ratify and implement. So, ladies and gentlemen, where does philanthropy fit in this global struggle to overcome the triple crises of global warming and biodiversity loss and pollution? And how can philanthropy truly make a difference in advancing progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 14? The first point to make is that philanthropy has a much-needed role to play in achieving the SDGs. The SDGs are a universal blueprint agreed to by us all back in 2015, and every facet of society has a stake in their success or failure. We all have ownership of them. We all have a duty to faithfully implement them and to contribute to them to the best of our abilities as individuals and corporations and as foundations. Given the broad socio-economic coverage of the SDGs, I believe the great majority of philanthropies have missions that are affirmed by the SDGs. Thus, you could say there's fundamentally a symbiotic relationship between the SDGs and the missions of most philanthropic funders. The United Nations is a member state organization, in effect representing governments of the day in its 194 member states. Back at home, internationally, most governments are open to cooperation with entities which support their own priorities and help them meet their international commitments. A case in point, I was in Fiji recently attending the regional meeting organized by the Waite Foundation, where I saw that the Foundation's commitment to assisting small island states formulate their sustainable ocean plans was really making a difference. Here I make the point that in most cases, philanthropy is independent of government. To varying degrees, philanthropy can strongly influence government. This might be in the form of funding advocacy for a variety of policy positions that a government is considering or should be considering. Such funding might cover the review of legislation and policy think tanks, the public awareness efforts, and social media campaigns. Here one might think of supporting national progress for the ratification and implementation of the environmental agreements to which I've just alluded. Other issues that spring to mind in this regard might be a moratorium on deep-sea mining or the establishment of large-scale marine protected areas. A further point of beneficial difference is that philanthropic funders can deploy capital whenever and wherever they think fit. They can invest in work that governments, UN agencies, and other funding bodies would not fund because it's not yet mainstream. Over the years, I've observed so many examples of work at the edges, in time becoming the prevailing work at the center. And in many cases, it was philanthropic funding that made the work at the edges possible. The old adage says, if you want to observe change, go to the edges. So I salute those who are putting orthodoxy's feet to the fire by testing the boundaries. It was not many years ago, for example, that the deepest parts of the ocean were thought to be devoid of life of any substance. But today, our often underfunded marine scientists have unveiled a vast menagerie of bewildering life flourishing in the depths. Philanthropy has another advantage. It has staying power. Most philanthropic foundations don't operate on 3 or 5 year funding cycles and can stay the course for however long is required to meet mission goals. The CEO of a large international philanthropy, in fact, I notice he's in the room, told me recently that the challenge comes when philanthropy steps back. He said it's important to have either solved the problem at hand or to have an alternative solution to ongoing funding, with the transition structured early into investment planning. Philanthropy has convening power. The combination of high-profile founders, significant capital, and a track record of impact can be very effective in bringing together key stakeholders around a table, even at very short notice. So as we work towards next steps in SDG 14 implementation, that convening role extends, in my case, to a cooperation with a philanthropy that will contribute to the costs of a global meeting that we're putting together to address ways to help stakeholders eradicate humanity's 34% overfishing record. Philanthropy can be flexible in how it deploys capital. It can offer grants, tied or untied, contract work with specific deliverables, or the pooling of funds through so-called collective philanthropy. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs that Inga mentioned is a case in point. Or the Blue Nature Alliance with its consortium of philanthropic funders combining to build a $125 million fund to deliver on protection of 5% of the ocean by 2027. Increasingly, philanthropy is also leading the way in impact investing, deploying high-risk capital that delivers a commercial return as well as positive ESG impacts. Here I've witnessed philanthropic investments in early-stage companies developing alternative fish meal and alternatives to plastic products. in the process de-risking these investments for other investors to follow. And then in the work to meet the targets of SDG 14, many a representative of a small island developing state has extolled the assistance that they've received from philanthropy, citing nimbleness of decision-making and access provided to leadership, to institutions, and to funding. So on behalf of them all, I applaud philanthropy's contributions to the advancement of the SDGs. And in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, many of the SDGs palpably depend on philanthropy for any chance of achievement by 2030. Here I am reminded of something that was written some 2,000 years ago. To whom much is given, much will be required. I've already referred to intergenerational justice, and I leave you with the thought that what is required of us is that we leave the world in a state in which our children and grandchildren inherit the continuity and are able to spend their days in the fullness of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. This was very fruitful also to connect the pollution, climate, and biodiversity crisis together, and also highlighting some of these discussions that are ongoing in WTO about subsidies and how we can change the overfishing that is occurring. And of course, mentioning not only the BBNJ, which is a very positive thing on protecting areas beyond national jurisdiction, but also the way that maybe the Philanthropic World Organization can support a ban on deep sea mining, which we all are very concerned about. And like Inge also said, let's not do anything more to the oceans that we already are doing. Let's not do CO2 storage at sea. Let's not start deep sea mining. Let's make the ocean more resilient, but not affecting it more than we already have. With that, I just want to, we so much appreciate that Sylvia Earle made the trip here. And before we go into the panel discussion, we would like Sylvia to say some words, and then we get on with the panel. Thank you.
The opportunity to follow Peter Thompson, I'd like to start where he left off, I think, with comments about the role of philanthropy in implementing the SDG goals, especially number 14, and to suggest that philanthropy is more than what is commonly thought about today in terms of the large amounts of private money that can be deployed with greater nimbleness, fewer constraints than with government funding or with various corporate connections. And this suggests that philanthropy, in addition to that, is a very individual matter. Everybody can give something. All of us must, if we are to make the change that is needed. I mean, kids ask me, and so do some grown-ups sometimes, as if I have answers. What can I do? I'm just one little person. And I've come to say, look in the mirror. What have you got? Who are you? What is your talent? What is special to you? Each of us, we know we're all individuals, and each of us has something going for us, one way or another, whether it's a way with numbers, a way with people, a way with storytelling, whatever it is, to use that gift and give it back. Never before have we had a better chance in all of human history to secure an enduring place for ourselves within the natural systems that make our existence possible. I say that because what I've got, I suppose, is like Jane Goodall, like a number of those who've been around David Attenborough for a few decades with our earlier years in the Holocene era that characterized the greatest era of human prosperity in all of history, last 10,000 years. My flippers are deeply into the Holocene, but most of my life I've spent in the same time that you have, the Anthropocene, this time when human actions have literally transformed the nature of nature. And we can't reverse the laws of nature, although a lot of people seem to wish that were possible. But working within those laws, when I was a child, no one thought we could harm the ocean. Nature, yes, we could cut the trees, but the ocean, too big to fail. But we have the evidence. It's happened on my watch. And again, if I have something to give, it's a lifetime of being a witness. And I don't want to magnify the comparison, but on my watch, astronauts have gone high in the sky. And to an individual, they come back transformed and want everyone to know what Earth looks like from space and how vulnerable this little blue miracle is. Look at the stars. Just gazillions of places in our universe, but there's only one that is just right for us. And as a witness to what we have been doing to this miracle, always with the best of intentions, trying to make Earth better for us, for humans, for our prosperity. It's only right about now that we're beginning to account for the cost, what it takes out of nature to underpin our prosperity. When we thought it didn't matter how many trees we cut, didn't matter how many dams we built on the free-flowing rivers, how much of our waste that we put into the waters of the world. It just seemed that whatever we do, we could get away with it. The reason that this time is so special is that for the first time, we really have a wake-up call. Nature is, giving us the message that we are vulnerable to change. We need a planet that stays within certain, flexible stages. It gets cold, it gets hot, the tilt of the Earth changes a bit, but throughout all of our 10,000 years of prosperity and during the times that preceded that, Earth has been within safe limits, but now we are changing the nature of those, call them boundaries, if you will, and we have the ability for the first time to measure it, to see it. We know what to do. And the problem that we're now facing is the will to take action. I think the biggest problem of all is not people in this room, because I think you're keenly aware of the dangers we're in and really receptive to trying to do something about it. But step outside, get into a taxi, go into a shopping mall, go anywhere. And people don't know what you know. You can't care if you don't know. And there's been a tremendous marketing campaign about climate by those who seem to think that it's in their best interest to deny the changes that are taking place, to think that the ocean is infinite, that we can continue to take and take and take without limit, without worrying, or whatever it is. When I'm asked what is the biggest problem facing the ocean today, I can get really enthusiastic about what we're putting into the ocean, all the plastics and the other stuff. I can get really worked up about what we're taking out of the ocean, deep sea mining, industrial fishing, I mean, even water itself, the sand, big issues. But far and away, the biggest problem is people don't know why they should care. I mean, you care, I care, but how do we have the ability, with all of our communications expertise in the 21st century, convey the truth about what's happening? We know marketing tobacco convinces a lot of people that it's good for you to smoke. We know that marketing has convinced a lot of people to think that what climate change? Why should I worry? When I think about what we can do, what philanthropy can do in a big way, is to market the truth. If you hear a lie often enough, people tend to believe that lie, even if it's not based on any truth at all. What if people heard the truth with the same level of marketing skill that you have, that we're subjected to, everything from soap flakes to cigarettes to climate deniers or whatever it is? Political campaigns are built on convincing people that they ought to think this way or that. We need to continue exploring the ocean because ignorance of the ocean is a fundamental problem. If you don't know, you can't care. Most of what is known about the ocean stops at about diver depth. When I say most, coral reefs. Why are we so focused on them? Because people know about them. But they're equally important deep sea systems. Since we don't know about them, we can't care. We don't care. We need to think about what we don't know, the magnitude of our ignorance, the precautionary principle, if you will. We have explored the surface of the ocean. We've mapped, maybe now with enthusiastic efforts to try to map the ocean to get up to speed with something comparable to the land or the moon or Mars or Jupiter, where we've got really good maps, but not the surface of our own planet beneath the surface of the ocean. Maybe 20% now is pretty well mapped. 100% of it has general configuration. We know where the big mountain chains are, but there's so much more we need to do. Imagine trying to establish guidelines for where do you put roads in North America if you've never been to North America. I mean, we need exploration as a priority and communicating what we already know, but also to know, and people need to know how much we don't know. It's one of the biggest discoveries in my lifetime is the magnitude of our ignorance about the ocean. And yet to see people think that we know how many fish there are in the ocean, so we can set goals about how many we can take. We can count the trees. We can count probably every last one if we really set our minds to it. But with the ocean, it's all based on what we want to believe, what we want to take, and not so much on what is reasonable, because we really don't know. We're just beginning to understand the magnitude of corals deep in the sea, in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, not just up here in the warm, sunny waters. Just beginning to realize that the greatest diversity of life on Earth is actually ocean life, the greatest abundance, ocean, most of it living in the dark, below where sunlight can shine. That's the biosphere. 97% of the biosphere is ocean, most of it dark, cold, deep, but full of life. So, I guess I am really enthusiastic about being a 21st century human being. And I hope all of you are, especially the kids, but all of us, because we've got the best chance. we will ever have to turn from clear planetary decline and to be our time to shift to recovery and stability, because that's what we need in order to not just thrive, to survive. We need a planet that is habitable. And that every day should be the headline. What are we doing? What are you doing? What are everyday choices that each of us make about what to wear, what to eat, what to do with your life? Start with, what am I doing that can keep Earth habitable? For those with significant sums to deploy about how do you keep the planet safe, right now, with 2 big treaties that enable us for the first time to think about the high seas. It's half the world. Half the world. It's the global commons. Everybody has a clear, not just vested interest, but a responsibility, an opportunity to use whatever you've got to safeguard the high seas, top to bottom. And that includes the mining interests that are now poised to raise havoc with probably the last, most intact of all of Earth's systems. So far, they've managed to escape the kind of physical damage that we have deployed over most of the land. Think of it. Almost half of the world on the land converted to agriculture, one way or another. And then there's all the rest, maybe 15% actively being protected, but there's not much of nature that has the same scale of being intact, or the space. You know, it's the biggest part of the planet that is still reasonably intact. Why would we even think of taking bites out of this? And why are we even thinking of industrial fishing in the high seas? Just a few nations are vested there legally. We're worried about unreported, illegal, and whatever, unregulated fishing everywhere. But the biggest problem about fishing is legal fishing. And the fact that people are convinced that it's okay because we don't really know. I haven't thought about fish the way we think about trees as carbon-based units. We need to really, if we're serious about climate change, keep the oil, the gas, the coal in the ground, keep the trees in place, plant more of them, restore what we can. But where is the message about keeping fish in the sea? The trouble is we have habits born of our civilization and wonderful recipes for consuming fish. We're addicted to seafood, but let's think about life in the ocean with new eyes, new understanding, armed with 21st century awareness.
Sylvia?
Look at the carbon cycle. Where does it take you? Into the ocean.
Sylvia,
Yep,
we just have 1 minute because we need to. Thank you.
But I'll stop with one caveat.
Yes, of course.
That the deployment of whatever we've got aimed at this moment in time, the opportunity with high seas, biodiversity, to pull out all stops, to market the truth, and then take action that will try to stabilize whatever systems, land and sea, by protecting what remains and not allowing further destruction of places that are intact. We know what to do, and I certainly am thrilled that there are major funds outside of government, outside of industry, that can be deployed and solve this problem. We need to take action armed with the will and the opportunity. Best chance we'll ever have.
Thank you, Sylvia. much. And on that note, you know, I think a lot of our speakers highlighted the education aspect of it, how important it is to educate people, how important it is for the philanthropic organization to actually somehow fund so science becomes more public, so it becomes understandable, and also with the oceans. So we all know that there is an issue with the oceans, and we can describe it in any way and advocate the science in a way that everyone can understand it. I think that is very important for the ocean. So sort of to follow up on the presentation, I just wanted to include Christian as well in saying, you know, what do you see? I mean, what did your organization see? Philanthropic action that can strengthen cross-sectoral activities, because that's what's really needed. We are not just talking about climate, we're not just talking about biodiversity, we're not just talking about pollution, we're talking about all the impacts there are. How do you see that your activities can sort of including the interaction with community to make progress? Christian, I'll leave it to you, and then Francesca will answer that question as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to be here with so many friends. Great to see you, Sylvia. So I'm here representing the Bezos Earth Fund, which is one of the newest philanthropies in the space, but also one of the larger. We're very privileged to have a commitment and to deploy $10 billion focusing on climate and nature solutions. But one thing that's different and important is we recognize the urgency, and part of what we're actually trying to do is deploy it by 2030. We're not establishing in perpetuity. We think this is a decisive decade, and we're trying to do it to support the new global biodiversity framework. If I were to summarize our strategy, it's 3 words: protect, restore, transform. We have to protect what we have, including the protected areas. We need to restore many of the areas that we have lost, but we also need to transform the way we live. So we're making substantial investments now in transforming food systems, dealing with things like cattle, starting to look at things like fisheries and other aspects that are critical, and also energy systems in cities. So I think there's some really interesting opportunities there. Maybe let me just give you one specific example of one of the things that we've done, and Peter knows it well, that may illustrate the way we're thinking about approaching and working with others, which is around what we call the Eastern Tropical Pacific, which is the area of the oceanic islands from Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador, all the way to Galapagos. And exactly 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago, in Glasgow at COP26, the 4 heads of state of the 4 governments came together and signed an agreement to protect 30% of this region before 2030, not by 2030, but before. We saw this as a tremendous opportunity to provide some funding, but very importantly, coordinate it with other donors. So we pledged and invested already $30 million to support work across these 4 countries, supporting civil society organizations. But very importantly, we created a coalition with 11 other donors, including public donors like Germany, like the GEF and others. And together, we've deploying $180 million to support this goal in this region. The net result is in less than 2 years, the marine protected areas in this region increased from 200,000 square kilometers to 600,000 square kilometers, tripled in less than 2 years. That is what we need, and we need it 10 or 100 times, fast, bigger, and in the right places, very importantly, with the right science. And that was thanks to the political will and commitment of some of the heads of state that were there, some of the science and some of the groundwork that had been done by many organizations over decades, and the willingness and the ability to try and work together around this. Now we're trying to not only make them paper parks, you'll be happy to know, Sylvia, we just approved a grant on exploration of the seamount specifically in this region, because we need to understand exactly what's there, but also to really focus on the control, surveillance, using the latest technologies out there. And yes, dealing with fisheries is a key issue here. And we welcome the BBNJ as one of the key agreements that will allow us to plug in some of the gaps and build this connectivity, because one of the things we know is many of the species that are here don't respect the boundaries, and they're moving up and down in that entire corridor. Just one example, the hammerhead sharks that are legendary in the Galapagos in Darwin, are breeding in the mangroves of Panama, and they're moving across that. So if we really want to solve this problem, you have to look at it at the right scale and the right way. And that's just one example of what we're doing. And as Peter knows, because we announced it at the Ocean Conference in Lisbon, we also feel that we need to scale up our investments. And even as big as we are, we're small. The challenge is so much bigger. So one of the things we did is we partnered with 10 other philanthropies, and we created something called the Protect Our Planet Challenge, where we committed $1 billion to support 30 by 30. Together, we've pledged $5 billion, which if you stop to think about it, that's bigger than the entire Global Environment Facility. So just to put in perspective the scale of these investments, but our commitment to do it, I'll be reporting later this week in some of the events that we've already in the first 2 years already invested $1.6 billion globally to support this particular goal. But it's not only about 30 by 30. So let me finish maybe with 5 words that I think reflect a little bit of sort of the way we're approaching our work and the role of philanthropy, which are around scale, speed, impact, innovation, and equity. Very quickly, scale, I already alluded to. We need to deploy a lot. I mean, we know there's a $100 billion commitment to the climate. We need at least $100 billion more to do the global biodiversity framework. We're currently investing 1/5 of that. We need to really ramp this up. Philanthropy can help, but it will never replace those commitments. And we also need to look at private capital that's willing to move into the space for restoration in other areas, and how do we create the right conditions. So that's point number 1. But 2 is speed. We can't sit around and think about it. We've been talking about these issues, and we're failing. I mean, let's accept it. We have great goals. The SDGs are great. The HE targets were great, but we didn't meet any of them. So really the question is, how do we accelerate this transition faster? And I think we really need to do that, and that's why our commitment is to actually deploy the funding by 2030. Third is around impact. I mean, we do believe that it's not just about goals and objectives and visions. We actually have to have clear measurable goals, and we need to be able to measure progress toward that. And I think that's something that more and more philanthropy is looking for, and how do we really deploy this funding? So one of the things you mentioned, science, and one of the things that we are investing in is supporting what's called the 2 things, the Land and Carbon Lab, which is the World Resources Institute, where basically what we're doing is building a global forest watch platform that maybe you know, expanding it to cover other ecosystems now. And we will actually be able to track the planet with things like the planet, satellites and things at a resolution of about 3 meters on a weekly basis. So we'll have data that we can actually look at to measure this. And the other is something we call the Systems Change Lab, to look at the 40 great transitions that need to happen, and we're issuing a report every year because we feel it's critical to have independent points of view and independent data that's monitoring the progress. It's easier in some ways for us than for governments or for the United Nations in some ways. Then very quickly, innovation. I mean, I do think we need to think about new ways of working. We need to look at new ways of mobilizing capital. Ingrid mentioned, for example, the digital sequence information. It's a big opportunity. It's a big challenge. And David and I were just talking about it in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago. We need to move fast on that and to be innovative. The opportunity to really mobilize funding from the private sector, from the biopharmaceutical industries, from agricultural companies is great. And yet, at the current pace that we'll do it, if it takes us 5 years to reach an agreement, it's not going to help. So one of the things that we're exploring right now is, can we provide some support to explore and give a set of options to the Secretariat and to the parties to do this next year at the COP16. We cannot sit around and wait 8 years. It'll be 2030 before we reach an agreement on DSI, and we need to look at this opportunity. And I'm sure David will want to comment on that. And the last one, but very importantly, equity and justice. Equity and justice. Let's not forget, a lot of the problem is around equity within our societies, between nations, between generations, and we absolutely have to address this. And we're trying to really put more emphasis on this. So, for example, in a lot of our work on protected areas, we're investing over $100 million right now to secure the tenure rights of indigenous peoples and local communities to their lands, because we think they're stewards and guardians of their lands, and it's critical. The good news is in the new Target 3 language, it clearly recognizes protected areas, OECMs, I've never liked the acronym, but okay, and indigenous territories. And there's a tremendous opportunity. Let us not forget, for example, in the case of tropical forest, that traditional communities have customary rights over 1 billion hectares of forest. How do we secure that? How do we empower them to really do this? So we recently announced an investment of $200 million in Brazil, working with the Lula government to specifically designate 57 million hectares of the Amazon as indigenous territories and protected areas in the next 3 years. This is the speed and the scale. So I think we can move fast, but I'll just finish by saying we need to do it together. Because I think philanthropy is being very fragmented. Everyone's doing their own efforts. It's too big for any one philanthropy, any one government. And I think the best opportunities are going to be where we can come together and really focus on issues like the Eastern Tropical Pacific or whatever the key priorities are around this. And we're certainly ready to do our part. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to come back later at the panel with some other questions.
So much, Christian. And I fully agree, we need to coordinate. We need to coordinate all our efforts to actually make a change. And with these words, I just want to ask Francesca to give her input, and then I want to give the word to David as well. Thank you.
Sí, I'm going to translate. So the question is...
Lo que quería preguntar es si es una sola respuesta.
You're going to have just one question.
¿Es una
Do we have enough
pregunta?
time for more
I
questions?
think we're going to...
Es que todo depende si me alargo o me corto. Ya, ok, ya. Entonces la pregunta era, por favor, ¿me puedes repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So I think that what we wanted to do, like Christian also replied to, is how can philanthropical action strengthen the cross-sectoral activities, including the interaction with community, and to make progress towards the SDGs, or all the targets within the UN process, whether it's 30 by 30 or urban depollution targets.
Pati, ¿me hay traducido?
Yes, I'm going to traduce,
Ya.
to translate.
Bueno, agradecer primero que nada
First of all, I would like
a
to say
UICN,
thank you for
a
the
Fundación
USN, Velux
Velux
Foundation,
también, a Peter también,
A Peter,
a Naciones Unidas también
United
por crear todos
Nations,
estos espacios que son fundamentales.
to create
Muchas de
all
las
those
cosas que
spaces
hablaron acá de la
and the dialogue that we
filantropía,
have.
concuerdo
I
absolutamente.
agree with a lot of things that we talk about
Dijeron cosas que
today.
son muy relevantes y
You
muy
mentioned a lot of things
importantes.
that are very important.
Llevo 22 años trabajando
I've been working for 22
en
years
filantropía
in
desde que se
philanthropy
constituyó la fundación.
since our foundation was created.
Era joven y muy soñadora.
I was young and very dreamer.
Y creo que eso, lo de soñadora, fue lo que me llevó en el fondo como a ponerme un propósito y dirigirme a ese propósito.
And maybe because of that, I put to myself a big mission and I crossed to that.
Creo que es importante cuando hablamos de filantropía, tal vez explicar lo que significa la palabra filantropía.
It's important to explain a little bit what is
Filantropía
philanthropy.
significa que son acciones incondicionales, sin fines de lucro en el fondo.
Those are unconditional actions, yeah,
¿Ya?
for public impact.
Claro, a diferenciación de lo que puede ser responsabilidad social, que también es muy bueno que se pueda hacer
And we all
responsabilidad
know
social
that
en la
it's really
empresa.
also important beside that, the responsibility, the social and personal responsibility that we have, but it's not the same.
Pero la filantropía toma un rol distinto hoy en día.
The philanthropy has a different role today.
Y eso es lo que me apasiona y lo que me gusta de poder estar acá, pudiendo
And this is
colaborar
really
también en
what I
esto.
wanted to focus on today.
En estos 21 años, creo que si me tuviera que quedar con una pregunta o una palabra,
In those 22 years, if I should define a word or question,
cuando hablamos de trabajar con los otros,
when we talk about work together with others,
es la confianza.
is the trust.
Una de las cosas que nosotros en estos 21 años que hemos hecho
One of the
ha sido
most,
que nuestra gobernanza
Important thing that we have done those
ha sido
22 years is the
impecable,
governance that we have developed in our
donde hemos
country.
podido, donde todo tenemos para que todos vayan, ¿cómo se llama? Allá en Chile se llama, ¿cómo se llama? Espérate, FECU social.
La FECO social. Yeah, we have developed a lot of trustable instrument like Fecu Social. It's a document that you have to show very precisely your income, your outcome, all the details of what you do with the impact and so on. And this is a way to show that philanthropy is a really serious instrument, not only in Chile, but in the rest of the world also.
Entonces, una de las cosas que hicimos nosotros desde un principio
So from the very beginning,
siempre ser muy confiables.
we try to be the most trustable as possible.
Y lo otro que fue muy interesante, el ver cómo íbamos en estos años tratando de armar una gobernanza que fuera sólida para la filantropía.
And the second challenge was to develop this governance that would be a solid one for the philanthropy purpose.
Y no es fácil.
And it's not easy at all.
Finalmente, las únicas respuestas que nos encontramos finalmente, cuando hablamos de filantropía, que tiene que ser como una donación desinteresada.
The only thing that was clear was a kind of fund that you have to create in a non-interested way.
Yo no voy a hablar de dinero ni de cuánto hemos invertido, pero son 21 años.
Yes, obviously we're not going to talk about money, but we
Donde
have
sí,
been working for
como familia,
21
hemos aportado
years.
gran parte de nuestro patrimonio a la filantropía y lo digo con
And
mucho
as a
orgullo.
family and with a lot of honor, I can
No
say
son
that
las
we have
obras.
invested
No son
the
las
most
obras,
important part of
y que quede claro eso.
our
¿Ya?
patrimony. It's
Sino
not
que
the rest,
es un esfuerzo
but
como
it's really
familia
the part of
poder
our
aportar lo que
our
aportamos
patrimony
en estos 21 años.
to invest in conservation and environment.
Y a veces también me pregunto, porque una de las cosas es esa pasión y ese ímpetu que nos ha llevado también a cumplir estos objetivos.
Sometimes we have the passions that push us to arrive to those objectives.
Y sé que todos los que estamos aquí nos interesa el cambio climático y sabemos lo que está pasando con el cambio climático.
And I know that we all know what is the matter here.
Pero
and,
así todo
and
voy a
what are
poner un
the
ejemplo.
challenge. But
Me
I just
acerqué al basurero de los reciclajes acá
want
afuera.
to put an example about the baggage
Y me di
outside.
cuenta que no habían reciclado nada
And I noticed
aquí
that no
adentro.
there wasn't a very good recycle system
¿Cuál
here.
es el llamado?
So what is the call really?
Vamos a seguir hablando.
Are we still
Este no es mi
continue to talk?
discurso.
This is not my speech, obviously.
Vamos a seguir
But are we still
prometiendo,
going to promise
hablando,
and to
conversando, diciendo que tenemos que seguir
That we
haciendo
have to do
ciencia.
this and that we have to do
La
science.
ciencia nos ayuda a tomar
Obviously, the
decisiones,
science help us to take decisions.
pero ya sabemos
But
que
we
los corales
already
están
know
muriendo.
that coral are dying.
Ya
We
sabemos que
already
llegamos a
know
una temperatura que no vamos
that
a poder
we are not going
revertir.
to be able
Lo
to go back
sabemos.
with the temperature. We already know that.
¿Qué vamos
So
a
what are we
hacer?
really going to do?
Y ahí es donde viene ese amor por la humanidad,
And this is where we have to call our love for
por
the
el
humanity,
paraíso.
for the
El
paradise.
paraíso no está arriba.
The paradise is not
El paraíso es nuestra
there,
tierra.
it's the land.
Es
it's the
nuestra
earth.
madre tierra.
It's our mother earth.
Me inspiré, ¿eh?
Yeah, I get inspired.
Y para nosotros,
And for us,
durante todos estos años ha sido, estos 22 años nos ha
during
dado
those
mucha
22
garantía.
years, we have had a lot of guarantees.
Nos ha dado la garantía de tomar un proyecto y poner
We
un
have been able
foco,
to have a project, to put focus on
no solo a
that,
corto plazo, sino
not only in the
también a
short
largo
term,
plazo.
but in the long term.
Nos ha dado también la capacidad de innovar,
We have
de
been able
ser
to make a lot of
creativos
innovation,
también, porque
to develop
entendemos
creativity,
que cuando estamos
because we
hablando de que
understand that
necesitamos un nuevo cambio de conciencia, un
When we
nuevo
talk
cambio de
about a
paradigma,
change of paradigm and
la
conscience,
creatividad
to
es
develop
fundamental.
creativity.
Y eso quiere decir que también en el intento nos vamos a caer,
and it
nos
means
vamos a
that probably we're
equivocar.
going to make mistakes too.
Tal vez no vamos a poder, tal vez apuntar realmente donde queremos llegar,
Maybe we are not going to focus in the proper way,
pero sabemos que tenemos que hacerlo.
but we have to try.
Nosotros en Chile,
Chile,
a lo largo de 12 años que duró
those
el
last
proyecto Blue Boat Initiative,
12 years, we developed this project named Blue Boat
un
Initiative.
proyecto maravilloso
A
que
wonderful
reúne la sociedad
project
civil,
that
pública y
It's being
privada,
developed between the public, private, and civil
que
society.
independiente de ser un proyecto que busca una solución real para una amenaza real de los cetáceos en el
So, just
Corcovado,
to explain, the Blue Boat Initiative is a project that installed a buoy in the North Patagonia in order to prevent the shift of presence of whales.
No solamente eso fue importante, sino hacerse cargo de esta problemática, sino lo que sucedió
So beside this project, even if obviously it was a
en
very
las
huge
mesas de
event,
trabajo, en las
the
conversaciones,
buoy and the
en
technology
esa
by itself,
diversidad
it
de
was really
personas
important, the
donde
working
podemos tener
table that we
diferentes ideas
developed in order to put together
y donde a
all
lo
the
mejor podemos tener
agents
muy
of the
malas ideas,
society.
pero también podemos tener muy buenas ideas.
So in some table you have scientists that were working together with good and bad ideas, but fixing
Pero
a common
en
point.
esa diversidad
And
y
in
en
this
esa
diversity
unión,
and in this union,
donde no hay separación. Y ahí hay
where you
otra
don't
cosa.
have
¿Por qué separamos cambio
separation,
climático, biodiversidad?
and when you force them to
¿Por
talk
qué el ser humano siempre
without
está
dividing
separando?
climate change and biodiversity, because human beings used to
Si
divide,
nosotros somos los navegantes de este planeta,
we are
estamos
crossing
todos
and we are shifting this
interconectados.
world. We need to be
Y
interconnected.
no solamente interconectados con el planeta,
We need to be interconnected not
sino
only with
también
the
estamos
planet, but
interconectados con el
also
universo.
with the universe.
Y eso es hermoso.
And this is beautiful.
Somos seres que estamos conectados con el
We are
universo
connected with the
y somos
universe,
seres que
and
estamos
we are
conectados con la
connected
tierra
with
también.
the earth and the
Y eso es
land.
maravilloso y
And this is
deberíamos
wonderful.
como estar muy agradecidos de poder vivir también los
And
tiempos
we
que
should
estamos
be
viviendo.
grateful to living now those
Es un
times.
tiempo difícil,
It's a difficult time,
muy difícil.
very difficult.
Yo no sé si vamos a ser capaces de revertir lo que está
I'm
sucediendo
not
y soy
sure
bien drástico en
if we are
decirlo.
going to be able
Hay veces que
to revert
que
this.
me-
I'm not sure.
que
Sometimes
tiendo como a derrumbarme un
I
poco.
just feel that this is not going to be
Pero no me
possible,
puedo
but
derrumbar.
we have to continue.
Y esto no es para mis
And
hijos,
I'm not doing this
ni
for
para
my
mis nietos.
kids or my grandkids.
Esto es para nosotros,
This is
para
for us.
ahora.
This
Es
is
ahora, now. 5 años, 2 años,
Now,
1
5
año,
years,
hoy
2
día.
years, 1
No
year
es para mis
today.
nietos,
It's not for
no
my
es para
grandkids.
mis hijos.
It's not for my kids.
Y quiero agradecer, Silvia,
And thank you,
porque
Silva,
muchas veces me ha
because
tocado
many times
escuchar a veces a gente adulta que dice,
I have heard
me da lo mismo, total, yo no voy a estar.
people saying, I don't care because I'm not going to be there for that.
Y quiero agradecer, Silvia,
I wanna thank you,
tu perseverancia,
your perseverance,
tu pasión.
your passion.
Y sé que tú amas
And I
la
know
naturaleza.
that you love nature.
Lo sé.
I know that.
Y por eso nos llevamos bien.
And this is why we like each other.
Bueno, no tenía nada que ver con lo que tenía escrito.
It has nothing to do with what I was.
Podría hablar de
prepared.
muchas cosas más
I could
también.
talk
Me
about a
encanta
lot of
hablar de
things.
educación,
I love to
me
talk
encanta
about
hablar de
education,
ciencia,
about
me encanta
science,
hablar de conservación.
about conservation.
Tenemos en Chile 3
We have 3
territorios,
territories
que
for
esos 3
conservation in
territorios
Chile,
en 3 latitudes
in 3
diferentes
different latitudes.
nos ha dado una tremenda posibilidad también de conocer realmente
This
lo que es
territory
hacer
gave
una
us the
conservación y un
possibility
plan de
to
conservación
understand how to
efectivo.
develop conservation and to develop a model of
Y
conservation.
aquí le voy a dejar un
effective.
mensaje a Abdalá,
And now a message for Abdallah.
lo que entendí ahora último.
Yeah, my last.
Que finalmente los planes de conservación
Finally, the conservation plan
ya no tienen que ser tan ampliados,
doesn't have to be that
sino que
large,
tienen que estar
but we need to
alrededor del
focus
sistema hídrico.
on the hydric
Es decir, los
system.
planes de conservación hoy en día tienen que estar unidos al sistema
we have
hídrico territorial.
To, yeah,
No
to
hay
get
más.
union with the hydric system in the land.
Ok, muchas
Thank
gracias.
you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. And I'm just, David, I know you want to reply to some of the issues that's come up, but I also want to sort of say, because both Christian and Francesca in her own passionate way, we need to have action now. We can't wait. We waited too long. And how can we sort of, as philanthropic organization, coordinate that? And I just wanted to say, when you answered the other issues that you thought was really important, what do you see as the immediate opportunities to leverage this capability and then take action now on the SDGs, but of course also on the new global target? Thank you.
Thanks so much, and big thanks to IUCN, to Velux Foundation, and to Cortes Solari for organizing this event and for bringing us together. And it was great to hear the passion behind Francesca just now. But most importantly, let me congratulate Peter on Fiji's decisive win an hour or two ago in the Rugby World Cup. So yeah, I mean SDGs 14 and 15, if Peter will allow us to look at 15 as well. SDGs 14 and 15 and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is essential for achieving the SDGs, all of them. As Inga said at the beginning, it's a hugely ambitious framework, hugely ambitious goals, and we have to address all 23 of these targets. That is really going to require, as we know, a lot more money and effort, and philanthropy has a role to play there, obviously. And what we've heard from Christiane is some really good examples, I think, of mobilizing at scale. But we're going to really need to change everything, right? We're going to need these transformative changes across society. And to maybe come to your question, what are the priorities? What are the levers? And I think this is going to resonate a lot with what the examples that Christiane already gave. We need to look both at the bottom up and from the top down. And so from the bottom up, I think, first of all, supporting the community, supporting the indigenous peoples above all, but women, youth, and other local communities. We know that we know from the science that ecosystems that are managed by indigenous peoples are in much better shape for biodiversity than other areas. If we can support those peoples, those communities, make sure, as you mentioned, land tenure, strengthening their rights over those lands, that itself is going to be really critical. So looking at how we can use the flexibility you have in the foundations, in the philanthropies, to support communities to do what they want to do, I think is a critical part. We saw this very much emphasized in Montreal, in the Kunming-Montreal framework. Christiane mentioned the reference specifically in Target 3 on protected areas, but it's there also across the whole framework, that we must recognize the rights of indigenous peoples. In the discussions that are going on right now in the establishment of the new fund under the GF, the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, is also, has this focus on supporting indigenous peoples. And I think we can look also at the experience that's already happening on the ground from philanthropic organizations, examples such as those being supported by the Bezos Fund and others, to learn on how we can do that. And then from the top down, I mean, we really do have to change the system. You talked about equity. We talk about, without a more equal planet, we're not going to be able to square this circle we have of reaching and allowing everyone to have what they need while doing so within planetary boundaries. That's just arithmetic in the end. A big entry point there is subsidies. We're spending, governments are spending, and it seems from I think the report that was mentioned on trends in climate finance, even some philanthropic spending is towards activities that can be harmful to nature. But governments basically are spending at least an order of magnitude more on subsidizing activities that are harmful to nature than on supporting activities that are positive to nature. So using not only the funds available, but the the convening power that you have, the political power that you have to change that is going to be key, and would have a great multiplying effect. And of course, beyond that, arguing for a more just planet, building the equity that you talked about, Christian. And then finally, I think, and you mentioned this also, the importance of collaboration. Collaboration with governments. It's great to have the possibility for innovation, to build on the passion that we've seen expressed here. But at the same time, we need to work alongside and within and reinforce activities at the national level. We need to avoid fragmentation. And then secondly, collaborating with each other to try and avoid or minimize that fragmentation, to make it easier for those that need access to these funds to get access to those funds, to not have to find multiple ways of fulfilling multiple requirements in terms of accessing those funds. And finally, a point that Francisca made about transparency, the importance of transparency, where the funds are coming from, what they are supporting, in order to build that trust that we need going forward. We have just less than 7 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, just less than 7 years to achieve the 2030 targets of the Kunming-Montreal framework. That means urgent action, as I think you've all the speakers have said so far. The challenge to make that really productive is working together. The good news is that we have these commonly agreed frameworks in the SDGs, in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, that allows, which provides a common and agreed framework for us to move towards. I hope that addresses the...
I think that's really helpful, and I think, when listening, and I hope that everyone else draw the same conclusions. The conclusion we draw is that we all agree that it's time for action now, and it's time to coordinate the action that we have. And like you mentioned, David, yes, and it's time that whatever fund that we're giving and whatever philanthropic work we're doing, we need to do it in partnership with the government as well, because they are the one that has the obligation to implement, the Paris Protocol, achieving 1.5, or, and also the global targets where we only got 7 years left to do that, and the SDGs for that matter. And then also highlight what comes after the SDGs. What are we going to do in 2030 when maybe, probably, we haven't achieved the SDGs? What are the action now? So I think because we are sort of, unfortunately, running out of time, we hope to pick up this discussion at COP28 again. But I think I just want to give you all 2 minutes for closing remarks. What you find is really, really important for the philanthropic work to, take action now. And I want to start with the IUCN, and then we just finish with Christian, and we just go around the table. Thank you.
Good evening. I think that we are over time, but let me just say a few words of thanks, because IUCN is one who is organizing this session. So thank you to all the panelists for your time. Thank you to all the participants here. I can see you still here. So thank you very much. And let me also thank Belux Foundation and Filantropía Cortés Solari. Señora Cortés Solari, we are all dreamers. We definitely believe that this planet can be changed, and that we can provide benefits for people all around. So let me join you in your dream. I also want to say that Filantropía Cortés Solari recently joined the group of IUCN Patrons for Nature, and where Sylvia L. actually is one of the founders of that group. So we are very thankful to you. The group of philanthropists is still growing. We invite new friends to the group to join us in IUCN and to achieve our mission, that is a just world that values and conserves nature. I think that this is a fantastic mission. Then on the philanthropic perspective, I'm just going to say a few things. First, that this is about people, because it's the people, you know, the families, the persons, the ones who decide to put this money on the table. It's not a government, it's not a company, it's normally a person, a family. And I think that that needs to be appreciated, because not everybody can, but also not every family or every individual that has money decides to put money in well-being and in conservation. So I think that has to be said at some point here. Also is that sort of funds provide many organizations and communities of three things. Innovation, they allow to innovate, because sometimes the other funds are really tied to programs and to strict rules, and it's just impossible for communities and for many people to access public funds. So these funds can allow for innovation. They are flexible and sometimes come at the right time. You know, now to apply for funds, it takes forever. You apply for something, you have to wait for 2 years. And then by the time you get the funds, probably the problem already has evolved. So the funds coming from foundations can come at the right time to support many. Also, they can bring to the table innovation and science, which is something that is also very difficult to find money. So the science part, the generating knowledge part, Sylvia, as you mentioned, is essential, and I think that is something that the philanthropic movement can help us all. And of course, philanthropia and philanthropic can also mobilize more people, and can mobilize the private sector, and can mobilize others that might not be thinking that this is an urgent crisis, but it is. And I think that sometimes the voices of the peers are better than the voices from the other side of the street. So that is something that also can come from that sector. And finally say that, you know, we are all looking for the same objectives, and coordination is important. And of course, this goes also for the philanthropic movement, and for all of us that are here. We need to coordinate, we need to join forces. We cannot do, you know, we cannot go all to the same place and try to compete among each other. I think that we have to work together, and that if we, you know, hold hands to achieve a better planet, we will be very, very successful. One, I have heard from many, you know, people who decide to give money in such a generous way, that they are doing it also because the ones who give is the happiest person. So I think that recognizing this act of giving is an incredible also act for all of us. So thank you, Señora Solaris, and thank you, Christian, to Bezos Foundation, and thank you to Velux Foundation and to other foundations and people around the planet who are really focusing and helping all of us to achieve a better planet. Thank you very much.
¿Cuántos minutos? No. How many minutes? Estaba preguntando. Bueno, agradecer nomás el panel. Me encanta de que podamos estar reunidos en esta mesa, tratando de crear un mundo mejor,
trying to create a better world,
o adaptarnos,
or trying
o ser
to get adapted,
resilientes,
or to be
o
resilient, or
sobrevivientes,
survive.
diría yo. Yo soy un poco drástica, ¿eh?
I'm a little bit drastic.
Pero me lo tomo en broma, pero no es en broma tampoco.
And it's not a joke, obviously.
Nada, quiero como cerrar como diciendo tal vez que ojalá que todo lo que
I want
hemos
to
hablado
close
acá
saying that I hope that everything that we talk about today
se convierta en mensajes que son reales,
will become real
que se
message
conviertan en acciones
and
reales,
real actions,
y de que todo lo que estemos aquí realmente podamos llevarnos como impregnado el mensaje de todos los que cada uno
and
puede
that we
poner
could
en
take
este
the message
momento.
of the others with us.
Y diría algo romántico
I would say something romantical,
y lo tiraría al cielo
and I would give to
para que
the
pudiera expandirlo en toda la humanidad.
paradise to expand to all the humanity.
Gracias.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. And I want to start already by the demonstration, because I think it is rare to have a sort of side events when you have many posters. This is collaboration. This is already collaboration, and it means also coordination, and it means also coordination, 3C. And this is what is a request from all the philanthropy and also to help. But also, I want to highlight something which is really concrete: the capacity of philanthropy to implement. Science can provide option, but we need who implements. To implement, you should have resource mobilization. You should have money. You have the capacity to mobilize human resources. This year, you have it in your hand. And what you said, Francisca, is excellent, because we should not just start to implement without not following some strict approaches. If we are speaking in business about business plan, we should also think about climate philanthropy business plan. That can really, and this is what we are thinking about, this climate philanthropy business plan. I think we are even getting everything. Now also we should, for any action, to have strict objectives. Now in this context, sustainable development, climate resilient development, I think what is looked for is just how we can say, we were using saving lives and goods. Let's add one name, saving lives and goods and nature. And this is saving, the word saving, but also we should think how to improve the well-being for this generation as future generation. And to do this, I think there is a sort of two concepts. The first concept is, and this is something that is really imposed by climate change. In the past, countries were assessed about their capacity first to manage crisis. But with the rhythm of even extreme events, it is too late now. We want to crisis management, risk management, to add some time. But now the concept is knowledge risk management. Knowledge risk management. And this, in knowledge, I think the role of philanthropy, the foundation, is excellent. As I said already, foundation like Alberto of Monaco, Como Foundation, Solaris, and maybe you have the capacity to improve knowledge, and you know the frequent way. The second thing, I'm improving knowledge. The other one, which is really important, is the concept of vigilance. The word vigilance in general is associated with security, but now we have climate vigilance. And by definition, vigilance is built on a triptych. To be vigilant, you should have the capacity to know. To be vigilant, you have the capacity to react. And to be vigilant, you have the capacity to prevent. And here also, I think the philanthropy can implement through their business, climate, philanthropy, business plan, how they can improve these three axes. So I think let's go for good vigilance, let's go for knowledge, risk management. I think with a good implementation, which is easier for philanthropy when it is followed, as Francisca said, this will improve the world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was just thinking how change is a constant, and how at the same time everybody's frightened about change, I think a take home for me from what I've been listening to today is transform. And Christian mentioned how it's one of the Bezos Earth Fund's 3 catch cries. Protect, restore, and transform. Did I get that right? Yeah, transform. I lived across the road here on First Avenue outside the UN gates here about 7 years ago. And I remember the day I brought home a report about the damage that the beef industry was doing to the world. And it was, the 10th report I'd read on that subject, and how beef production was just outstripping everything else in terms of destroying the planet. And I said to my wife, my God, we're brought up in beef cultures, a lot of us, certainly our families were, and we're part of this, we're part of it. We're going to keep doing it. And she pointed to a picture of our grandchildren that was on the wall, our 4 granddaughters, and said, do we love them more than we love eating hamburgers? And of course my response was, we got to give it up. So at that moment, we just gave it up, and change happened just like that. And we've never touched, it's a little bit difficult when you go to Italy and everything on the menu is veal. But apart from that, it's been so easy to change, to transform. And, I know it's hard to give up cigarettes or something like that, but once you've done it, you don't go back. And so I think this is where we are now with our, trying to get to the SDGs, without trying to save this planet for humans to live on, is this transformation thing. So I think for all your foundations, if you can be thinking in terms of that word transform, and making sure it's a key part of all your missions, is the fact that, we just can't carry on the way we're going at the moment. We have to fundamentally change consumption and production patterns, or we're toast. So I think transforms the word I'm going to take away from today's meeting. Thank you.
Last word before we wrap up.
But yes, it starts with every one of us. But I do think, that clarity of purpose that we've sort of come up with, protect, restore, transform, helps guide what we do. And the question is really figure out what are those key transformations that we need to do, and how do we monitor the progress toward them. And that's where things like the Systems Change Lab that we're supporting is designed to do. But it's going to take a substantial change of every part of our society. And we need to do it, and just add 2 things towards now, and let's do it together. We can't wait. This thing has to be done now, quickly. We need to do it together, because any one of us can't do it alone. Thank you.
Now, let's do it together. I want to say thank you to everyone who participated in this event. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions, but as I said in the beginning, we will be back at COP28, so please join us, and there we will definitely have time for questions. Thank you so much.